But the main thing I want to talk about today was about anxiety and about how anxiety can be a real problem for young people in particular, and about understanding anxiety and making sure that any help you can get, you do get with anxiety. So the big thing to remember is that a lot of people have anxiety. A lot of people are very poorly with it. So about 1 in 7 people, young people, will have a mental health problem, and of those, most of that will be anxiety or depression. But we don't see so much depression in young people as we do about anxiety. And that's what we all think we know what anxiety is, but the reality is that actually it's a very specific condition and it has a very specific set of things that go around it and a very specific set of treatments that are associated with it. So what is it? Well, some people will find that being anxious is a psychological thing. So they just sit and worry all the time. So they pick up an idea, a worry, I call it, and a person who's not anxious will pick up an idea and they'll look at the idea and they'll think, oh crikey, have I turned the hob off? And they'll think, yes, I have turned the hob off, and they'll put the idea back down again. A person with anxiety will pick up the idea of the hob and say, have I turned the hob off? I think I have. No, I'm pretty sure I have. No, I have. But they can't put the idea back down again. They hold on to that idea all day. They'll just ruminate. It's called ruminating. It's this idea that you get something in your mind, a worry, whatever that worry is. For me, it was always the hair tongs, but I'll come back to those later. That you get this worry, and the worry will not go away, no matter what you try and do in terms of rationalising it in your own mind. You think, no, look, even if the hob's on, it's not the end of the world, it will be fine. Yes, but what about the hob? You know, what about this, what about that, what about the next thing? And the problem with an anxiety is it then starts to take over your thought processes, and you feel compelled. So you feel compelled to go and do something about it. And for some people, that can turn into obsessive compulsive disorder. Of course, they can go from having this idea to going to have to do repeated things to make themselves feel better about that particular anxiety. We all have anxieties. We're supposed to. We're human beings. When we were developing in the evolutionary soup, it was a useful thing to have anxiety. It really was. So, you know, what we do is, we were in this evolutionary soup, and we had to know if there was like a problem with a big bear coming to attack us. So we would have this surge of adrenaline, all this cortisol would go through our body, and then we would run off into the distance and save our own lives. We don't really have a big bear chasing us anymore. We don't have that big bear that we have to know about, but we do still get the same responses to those anxieties. So you take your anxiety and you get this huge swell of adrenaline and cortisol, and all these hormones go whizzing around your body, and a lot of people will feel those very physically. So anxiety is not just this sort of psychological gnawing away of these worries. You're actually having a very physical response to those, and I call that the roller coaster anxiety, where you seem all right, and then suddenly, bang, you go down to this massive dip. And that is because those hormones have made your heart race, they've probably made your stomach feel unsettled, they may have given you a headache, they may have given you a lot of symptoms, a lot of very physical symptoms. And the problem with those physical symptoms, the real issue with it is that you get worse, because you think, oh my God, now I'm ill. I'm ill. On top of everything else, I'm ill. So then you get anxious about the physical symptoms that you're feeling. So again, that all rolls into it. And when you keep going and going and going with that, when it goes up and up and up and up and up, and you can't break the cycle of that anxiety, there are some people, although thankfully not many, who will go on to have an anxiety attack. And that's where all those symptoms snowball into one huge, great big kind of psychological and physical mess. And then you start to feel that you are genuinely going to die. So it's not that people are being silly or ridiculous. They are genuinely in the grip of something that makes them feel really bad. And sometimes that will involve ambulances and hospitals and all sorts of different things. So that's anxiety in its sort of form. You know, it comes, it takes hold of people. It's like a knotweed in your brain, and it can really cause a lot of trouble. And I've often said to patients, you know, problem with anxiety is if you're anxious for long enough, it will make you depressed, because it's so exhausting being anxious all the time. And the other thing you have to remember is nobody is choosing to be anxious, right? Nobody sits about thinking, oh, I know what I'm going to do today. I'm going to be really anxious about my life. That is not how it works. Anxiety is not something that we want to be. Anxiety is not something that any of us would choose. It is something that creeps up on us. It's something that takes hold of us, and it's something that a lot of people have. So I'll give you the example of my hair tongs. Okay, so hair tongs are quite a common anxiety actually. It's leaving the hair tongs on that's the problem. So I used to have a flat in London, and we had a porter called Alan. So Alan the porter would be sitting there minding his own business, and he'd usually get a frantic phone call from me from my GP surgery roughly about 9:30 going, Alan, I may have left the tongs on. Alan, I've left the tongs on. So even though it was extraordinarily embarrassing for me to phone Alan to go and check the tongs, and then Alan had to go, and it was also inconvenient, don't get me wrong, Alan was not happy man about go and find my tongs. And then Alan would let himself into my flat with the key, and then he would go around and he would make sure my hair tongs were off. And he'd phone me back and he'd say, Sean, all is good, the tongs are off. And for approximately 10 minutes, I'd be like, it's all good, the tongs are off. I can relax. And then what tends to happen to anxious people is they go through what I call the filing cabinet of their brain. So they then go, I have released myself from that anxiety. Alan has told me I have not burnt down my flat, or every other flat, or every other human being in northwest London, or everything else that I thought I was worried about before I realised the tongs were fine. So I then go through the filing cabinet of my brain, and I find another worry, because actually the idea was it was never about the tongs. Who cares about the tongs? The tongs turn themselves off after half an hour anyway. It is about the fact that I am anxious in general, and I need to find that other anxiety then to replace the anxiety that's just gone. And this is where people forget. They think they're anxious about one thing. They think, oh, if the doctor can just tell me I definitely don't have cancer, then I won't be anxious anymore. If the doctor can just tell me I definitely don't have a problem with my toe, I won't be anxious anymore. But that's not what happens. What happens is that I say to somebody, you definitely don't have cancer. I'm absolutely certain you don't have cancer. I'm delighted to tell you don't have cancer. And they'll go, oh, thank God, I'm so relieved. And then usually a day later, they'll replace that anxiety with another one. And the number of times I will say to people, let me help you with the anxiety. And they go, it's not the anxiety, it's the worry about the cancer. I go, no, it's just that they're actually part and parcel of the same problem. I am there to help you in all of your needs as a doctor. I am there to help you with your physical and emotional needs. And I am saying to you, that, yeah, you're right, you don't have cancer, but you have replaced that worry with another one. Or what happens is 3 weeks later, your brain tricks itself and it goes, oh, she said I didn't have cancer, but maybe she wasn't on her top form that day, or maybe she just didn't feel the thing I was feeling, or maybe she didn't do this, or maybe she didn't do that. So then we go back into the cycle again, and then the patient will come back and say, I think you might have missed my cancer, and I really don't think I have. I mean, I'm happy to listen to you if you think you do, but I don't think so. I think what you have done is you've just become anxious. That said, if you do think you've got cancer, by the way, just come and talk to me and we'll sort it out together. And if you still think I've missed it, I'm still happy to listen. But what I'm trying to explain is about anxiety and how it can take hold of people. Now, who gets anxiety? Well, anybody gets anxiety. Male, female, rich, poor, every demographic, everybody gets anxiety. But there are certain jobs that seem to lend themselves more to anxiety, and I think sometimes healthcare is very much one of those jobs that tends to lend itself to healthcare. And of course, you as young people may well be young carers. You may be caring for somebody, albeit your mum, your dad, or a friend, and those responsibilities of caring for somebody can induce anxiety in you. So you may feel anxious about a friend who's not very well, who's not eating, or who's doing something to hurt themselves, and you may be absorbing that anxiety yourself, and that is quite a complicated thing that we do. But if you're an empathic individual, you are quite likely to be anxious, and if you're a clever empathic individual, you can create some magnificent anxieties. That filing cabinet of your brain can just expand and expand and expand, and you can create some hugely intricate anxieties that will consume how you feel. So that's what anxiety is. For those of you who haven't had it, I'm so pleased for you, because it's a pain, and it's not very nice, and it stops you sleeping. And then we have to talk about, well, how do people cope with anxiety? And there are these things called maladaptive coping strategies to anxiety. So people will take on things that maybe makes them intermittently feel better, but in the long run is just making them feel worse. So the big ones there are drinking, smoking, substance misuse, self-harming, overeating, undereating, social anxiety, withdrawal, and checking. Checking is another big thing. People get very into checking, like me and my tongues. And so you get these sort of what we call these maladaptive strategies that come into play, and you think for that half an hour that you are feeling better for, you think, great, that's lovely. But the problem is all of those things tend to feed into the anxiety. They don't take it away in any meaningful way in the long term. So you might feel better for a few hours, or you might feel better for a day or so, but then it all comes back, and it usually comes back even harder and more fiercely. And particularly around alcohol and substance misuse, we can really help with that in our service. We've got a lot of contacts with something called CGL, who's our local substance misuse thing. But also, if you have a parent who's got a substance misuse problem or an alcohol problem, they can support you to help them as well, and to help yourself through what could be a very difficult time for you. So those things are all part and parcel of what we can offer at the service. But the point about anxiety is you have to recognise it in yourself. You have to know what is anxiety? Why am I feeling like this? What is triggering it? And then rather than going to those things like self-harm, which a lot of people describe to me as the sort of conversion of that psychological torment into the physical pain, that they by cutting themselves they feel better because that is giving them a sort of physical outlet for that pain. Problem is that a day or so later you may need to do it again, or 2 days later you may need to do it again, and then you've got a lot of scars, and it's really and the behaviour seems to get more and more, it seems to go up and up and up. So if we say to you, right, okay, you're anxious, so you come and see me and you sit down and you say, Dr. Stanley, I'm anxious. I think that the reason why I'm anxious is X, Y, and Z. I've got a few things that I can do that I can help, and I can help with anxiety. I can turn anxiety around in a heartbeat. But it needs you to tell me that that is what is happening. It needs you to come and let me know. And then what I can do is I can give you some medication if that's the right thing to do. So, and I don't mean antidepressants. What I mean is, like, say if you've got all those physical things like the palpitations and such like, I can give you a drug that will slow your heart down and might make you feel physically better. I can refer you into cognitive behavioural therapy, which is a type of therapy that helps people to take hold, you know, where I was talking about picking up and putting down a thought. Okay, so this is what CBT is trying to get you to do. It's trying to get you to pick up that thought, examine the thought, and then put it back down again, and not get consumed by the thought, to be able to break the cycle, and to be able to break the cycle of the unhealthy, maladaptive thingies. And it's called cognitive behavioural therapy, and it's fantastic, and it works really, really well for very anxious people. And the other type of therapy that you might want to consider, we'll talk about later in the day, is around psychotherapy and making sure that that we try and understand why you're anxious, what's driving those anxieties, and looking at aspects of your life and your lifestyle that may be making them worse. So the key thing about it is that it's not that I want to prescribe for anybody and everybody, I really don't, and particularly the under 18s, we have to do it on advice from child and adolescent mental health services. And anxiety can be so crippling for some people that is the right thing to do. But for a vast majority of people, pills aren't the solution. Pills sort of are only part of the solution, and they will increase your capacity to be able to take on board the therapies. Because some people are so anxious that you can't even sit them down and do the therapy because the anxiety is just so high. So you use the medications to try and get the psyche a little bit cooler, a bit calmer, and enable them to then come on board with you on a journey of therapy and make sure that things improve. And the bottom line about all of this, the absolute bottom line, is that you can help anxiety, but don't let it take hold. It's difficult for me, much more difficult for me, if you are not sorting it out early on. So if it gets in a very well-established pattern, it's much more difficult to break that pattern than if we catch you very early on. So if you are anxious, we can teach you techniques. And Ben works with lots of people who can help through either sport or therapy or art or music, all sorts of things that can help break that cycle for you and help bring you back to the place that you want to be as a psychologically healthy person. And I cannot emphasize enough that we are absolutely here to talk about those anxieties with you. The GP's only got the 10-minute slot. You're absolutely right. How do you get to the bottom of someone's anxiety in 10 minutes? Well, it's difficult. Some of us are better at it than others, I suspect. But the reality is that Ben and Ed and the rest of our team here, they have the time to spend with you to try and help understand those anxieties and get the help that you need to be able to process them and get better from it. And like I say, trying to get better without the help of medications, without the help of anything else, just working with you to understand what those anxieties are. And we know that everything got worse in lockdown. A lot of anxious people you'd think would get better, but they didn't get better because there was so much uncertainty. And if there's one thing the anxious person does not like, it's uncertainty. And there was so much uncertainty around what we were doing and whether we'd ever get out of it, and whether our parents would be ill, whether our grandparents would be ill, and we all felt it. And in a way I was one of the lucky ones because I had to work, so I had to keep my mind off it. I mean, even the fact that I was probably most likely to catch COVID because I was always sitting around people with COVID. But for me, that was less anxiety provoking than having to sit at home and think about COVID all the time. So one of the things that's good for anxiety is activity. And so locking yourself at home in a room on your own is not necessarily very helpful. It can make things worse for you. And so we ask, and we say to people, you know what, keep busy. Find that thing that you love doing. Find the thing that helps you get yourself out of that way of thinking. For me, it's Hello Magazine. Do not ask me why. I have always been able to switch off my brain when there's a Hello Magazine put in front of me. For those of you who are much younger than me, you won't even know what I'm talking about. But you will have your thing. You will have the thing that keeps you occupied enough mentally to be able to feel calmer, but is not stressing you out. And for a lot of people, work is very helpful for anxiety. For a lot of people, work makes anxiety worse. So you just have to kind of balance it all out for yourself. Make some sort of decisions with Ben and Ed and decide, well, you know what, I think that this would help me or this wouldn't help me or whatever, and find a plan and a roadmap to feeling better and a roadmap to feeling more less worried. And particularly with social isolation and school refusal, Ben's worked with people that he's worked helping people get to school, because obviously these types of problems, they can really change your future if we can't help at this stage of your life. And so we want to change this, we want to change this for you so that you can feel better and live the life you want and the life you deserve to live. So overall, anxiety is a very, very pertinent issue. Happy to talk about it with you anytime. I won't go on any further, but suffice it to say, don't suffer in silence. Come and see us, come and sort it out, and we'll work with you. And if you're depressed, that's a whole different conversation. And I've got some people later on who might be able to help you with those issues around depression, anxiety.